At first glance, you don't notice much change in Donaldsonville from 1973 to the present. The Seminole County Courthouse still stands at the end of town, offering the same view from Wiley Street that it did 10 years ago. People still go to town and take care of their business. It's just that there are more of them now.
No, things don't change much here. At least that's what folks in Donaldsonville will tell you. It's a worn-out expression, but this is your basic sleepy little town. Folks still gather at Lois's restaurant for breakfast in the morning. There's still a lot of farmland and a lot of farmers who work it. And there is still anger and sorrow and disbelief at what happened here on May 14th of 1973.
Jerry and Mary Alday's trailer sat just off one of the scores of two-lane roads that weave through South Georgia. Jerry was a farmer, and so were his brothers, Chester, whose nickname was Shuggy, and Jimmy, and so were his father Ned and his brother Aubrey. On Monday the 14th, they had been in the fields, and late that afternoon they all came to Jerry's trailer, one and two at a time. Ned and Jerry in a Jeep, later Jimmy on a tractor, and still later, Shuggy and Aubrey in a pickup. Unaware that inside were three escapees from a Baltimore prison and a brother of one of them looking for gas money. Each of the Alday men had been shot at least once in the head, Ned 7 times, Jerry 4. When Mary Alday came home from her job in Donaldsonville, she was raped on the kitchen floor, driven 6 miles to a dirt road that led into some woods. Dan White was the sheriff of Seminole County in 1973. Several hours after the murders, when family members became worried that none of the men had come home, he was called.
And my feeling is hard to explain, you know, when you walk into a trailer and you got 5 of your friends shot in the back of the head, placed on the bed and shot in the back of the head. And the only Jerry's wife were missing. We didn't know what in the world had happened to her. You know.
Jerry Godby, Seminole County Sheriff today. 10 years ago, he, like the Aldays, was working the land in this field just a few hundred yards from where Mary Alday was taken.
I was spraying peanuts. I noticed a car come by with some strange people in it. I didn't think anything about it at that particular time, but then the next day when I heard of all what had happened, and I do remember Mary's car going back down this road that we were on from the 4-way stop sign up here.
Godby guessed that the cars he had seen went down the only dirt road off Highway 285 West. He guessed right. The car the escapees had taken from Pennsylvania was found, and so was Mary Alday's body. Raped repeatedly, she too had been shot to death. Late on a May afternoon, 6 members of a family known by just about everybody in these parts had been murdered, and a lookout was on for Carl Isaacs, his brother Billy, his half-brother Wayne Coleman, and George Dungee. By the time the bodies had been discovered, the suspects were well into Alabama, on a trail that would take them into Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and finally West Virginia. Tomorrow night, the arrest and the return to Donaldsonville. On special assignment, Ernie Johnson, WSB News. The car they found in the Seminole County woods gave police a lead. It had been stolen in Pennsylvania. Its driver had disappeared and would be found weeks later, shot to death. Carl and Billy Isaacs, Wayne Coleman, and George Dungee were suspects in that case. The day after the Alday killings, the Georgia State Patrol had bulletins out for the 4, who by Thursday, 3 days after the murders, had made their way into West Virginia. George Dungee was caught first after a police chase at the bottom of a mountain range in West Virginia's coal country. The other 3 were able to run into the hills and spend the night underneath a cliff. But the next morning, they too would be in police custody.
They all 3 laying in there asleep.
Did they offer any resistance at all?
No, sir, we was too close home.
The next stop would be Georgia for Wayne Carl Coleman, 26, and his half-brother, Carl Isaacs, 19. They had pulled the triggers inside the Alday trailer. 35-year-old George Dungee, who shot Mary Alday to death, and 15-year-old Billy Isaacs, who would later testify against the other 3 in exchange for reduced charges of burglary and armed robbery.
The Seminole County Courthouse. In January of 1974, it would be the scene of not only 3 murder trials, but 3 tests of Georgia's new death penalty law, which had been on the books for about 9 months. The state would seek the death penalty against Carl Isaacs, Wayne Coleman, and George Dungee. Juries would return 3 convictions and 3 death sentences.
The new death penalty statute sought to end the arbitrary imposition of death as a sentence. It could only be used for crimes of treason, aircraft hijacking, murder of a corrections or peace officer on duty, murder by a prison escapee, murder committed during a robbery or burglary, or murder committed in a vile or heinous manner. While Isaacs, Coleman, and Dungee were sentenced to die in the electric chair, there was no telling when. Over 2 years after his conviction, Carl Isaacs told WSB reporter Marc Pickard he knew that someday his appeals would run out.
I might stay upstairs a couple years waiting on appeal, but I'm ready to go. If there's no other way out, which I doubt, I'd rather for them to go ahead and get it over with. That's better than make me sit upstairs and suffer and wait some more.
If you had it to do all over again, do you really honestly think that it would have turned out differently if you had anything to do about it?
Well, it'd turn out different in some ways. As you know, as far as pulling that trigger and killing them people, I believe it would happen again.
Carl Isaacs and the others are on death row here at the Jackson Diagnostic and Classification Center south of Atlanta. We wanted to go in and talk to them, but the Georgia Department of Offender Rehabilitation said no, that would not be in the best interest of the inmates. At any rate, what Carl Isaacs said back in 1976 has not been forgotten in Donaldsonville. It causes anger, causes fear, but above all, it causes frustration. Because in Seminole County, they're waiting for what they consider to be justice for the Alday murderers. And we'll have that story tomorrow night. On special assignment, Ernie Johnson, WSB News.
Well, I think it shook the whole town. And everybody has really been hurt.
I feel today just like I did the day it happened. And I think everybody in Seminole County feels the same way.
About the only difference in Bud Alday is that it's harder for him to talk about the murders of his 2 brothers, 3 nephews, and an in-law than it was several years ago. In fact, he would only do it if we agreed not to show his face. Back when the suspects were returned to Georgia, Bud was approached by a man offering to form a lynch mob, take matters into their own hands before a trial could be held. Bud Alday's decision against that is something he regrets today.
I thought that justice would be done through the courts. But since then, I found out that there's no justice in court at all. And I just wished I knew then what I do now. I wouldn't be spending money, tax money, and feeding them and them sitting up there getting fat.
When we asked Inez Alday, Aubrey's widow, to talk with us, she hesitated, thought about it overnight, and decided to. She does not speak with a lust for vengeance, but rather a desire to see the will of the court carried out, if not for the Alday family's sake, then for others.
I know it's not good to say anything about taking a life, because when you take a life, there's no way you can put it back in a body. But it maybe would save somebody else. Maybe if they get out, you don't know who they may come across, and somebody else may have to suffer the same thing that we've suffered. That they keep appealing and appealing. That's not fair.
It is not a feeling confined to family members. Former Sheriff Dan White remains bitter, says people are losing faith in the judicial system, says the sentence is there, but the punishment is not.
Well, you answer one question with me, what excuse have they got? Because they hadn't been put to death. They violated every law in the book, fell in the law. They killed, raped, and robbed all their family. And I thought, surely, when we went to trial and got the death penalty, that surely they would carry it out. And I wanted somebody to tell me, what have you got to do in the state of Georgia to be executed?
The current sheriff of Seminole County, Jerry Godbey, speaks with as much conviction as his predecessor. As he looks out over the wheat field which now covers what was Jerry Alday's yard, he speaks of his frustration, his confusion, his community's perception of justice.
We wonder where we have failed. You know, what can we do? I say this. What can I do? Let me know, and I'll try to do it. Nobody seems to know. Even the Attorney General. Does he know the state of Georgia? I don't know.
Attorney General Michael Bowers knows the frustration Godbey feels, not just in the Alday case, but other death penalty cases in this state. Tomorrow night you will hear from him, and from Patsy Morris, the American Civil Liberties Union death row monitor, who hopes Georgia's electric chair, unused for 18 years, stays that way. In special assignment, Ernie Johnson, WSB News.
I favor the death penalty, but more important than anything I favor is the fact that that is the law in this state today, and it's my job to try to see that the law is carried out.
I do not believe that killing people to show people that killing people is wrong is the answer.
Michael Bowers, Georgia's Attorney General. Patsy Morris, the death row monitor for the American Civil Liberties Union. When the topic is capital punishment, their differences are vast. Bowers, a firm believer that for some crimes, death is the only suitable punishment. Morris, an opponent of execution on religious grounds, supported by arguments that are constitutional, psychological, and practical. Both have problems with the current law. Morris claims it is meted out arbitrarily, depending on who is killed and where, and that a white life is valued more than that of a minority. Bowers finds fault with the appeals process, which, after trial, includes 10 steps, of which 3 are appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court and 2 to the Georgia Supreme Court. It is a process which can and does take years.
Until the United States Congress changes the burden which is currently imposed upon the federal courts to, in effect, second-guess state court convictions in capital felony cases, we will probably continue to be frustrated as we are today.
Bowers feels the entire appeals process could be completed in 2 years. Patsy Morris says if it takes 10 years to make sure a person's constitutional rights have not been violated, so be it. The appeals process should not be tampered with.
You are ever accused of bribing a public official or some non-capital crime, the same rights that adhere to Wayne called Coleman also adhere to you, and if you repeal them for Coleman, you have repealed them for yourself.
Morris also says studies have shown that convicted murderers become a prison's best inmates, that they should be given time to change by being sentenced to life rather than death, and that economically it is better for Georgia taxpayers when life is the sentence. The cost of keeping a state inmate is $24.61 per day. It is $49.21 per day for a death row inmate. Taxpayers will also pay about $450,000 a year for Georgia's 115 death row inmates to go through their avenues of appeal. Bowers' view of the economic argument.
It is our judgment, as exercised through our elected representatives in the General Assembly, that we have this ultimate sanction to apply to those people who commit the most heinous wrongs against society. As long as they say that and are willing to foot the bill, then it should be carried out. The people, though, have made that choice, but the people's will is being frustrated.
And he says the appeals filed often have little to do with guilt or innocence, but with technicalities. The social cost, in disrespect for the legal system, outweighs the financial cost, he says. Bowers will not comment specifically on the Alday case, just that he finds it atrocious that the death sentences have not been carried out after this long.
The emotions of the Alday survivors are human. If there were any way that I could minister to them, I would, because I agree that something was held out to them when the 3 persons were sentenced to death that hasn't come to pass yet, so that I feel deeply sorry for them. That does not mean that I believe that those 3 men should be killed, because it's not going to bring back the 6 members of the Alday family.
Tomorrow night, the most recent developments on the death penalty front, and a look at Georgia's future. On special assignment, Ernie Johnson, WSB News. The family name is etched in black marble, just as the memory of a 1973 afternoon is in the minds of the Alday survivors. Family members who wonder and wait, as do other longtime Seminole Countyans, for the execution of the men responsible for killing Ned Alday and his sons. and Aubrey Alday, and Mary Alday. We have taken you back to Donaldsonville this week, and we have talked with Georgia's top law enforcement official, Attorney General Michael Bowers, a supporter of capital punishment, frustrated by the fact that since the state's new death penalty statute went on the books 10 years ago, there hasn't been an execution. And we have heard from Patsy Morris, the American Civil Liberties Union death row monitor, who sees her job as keeping the more than 110 condemned inmates in this state out of the electric chair. That includes Carl Isaacs, now 29, Wayne Carl Coleman, 36, and George Dungee, 45, who have never denied killing the Aldays, but whose cases continue under appeal before the 11th Circuit Court today. The debate over capital punishment has been with us for years and will continue to be. However, the fact is Georgia does have the law. But does the fact that there has not been an execution mean the law isn't working? Or are lengthy appeals to be considered a certainty when death is the sentence? In Washington, they're trying to clear up what is a clouded appeals picture.
And the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court today, is reviewing a case out of Texas called Barefoot, the Barefoot case.
Barefoot is Thomas Andy Barefoot, convicted of the 1978 murder of a Texas police officer. 11 hours before he was to die by lethal injection, January 24th of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a stay. It is studying Barefoot and will rule sometime this summer on the role federal courts will have in delaying executions. That decision will reach coast to coast, affecting in some way the 1,163 inmates on death row in this country. While Attorney General Bowers may be a staunch supporter of the death penalty, he is also realistic. He knows the law as it stands now, especially in regard to appeals, is vague and in a way dangerous.
I think it fosters discontent and disrespect for the legal system, and I think that is a very bad thing for us. I think we would be far better to remove the death penalty from our statute books than to continue as we are today with the statute on the books, holding that prospect out to the public, but in fact not carrying it out. It's a mockery.